welcoming all of you to this evening's session, which is a very interesting session from a very experienced author and coach and NLP trainer, Peter Freeth. And the title of this session is Why Asking Questions is a Barrier to Problem Solving. So, during my discussions with Peter on what kind of a topic should we select, one of the things that he mentioned is, as therapists and coach, especially if you are a certified coach from many of these institutions, one of the things that we are always taught is to ask questions and use these questions to lead the client to outcome that would be satisfactory and happy for them. But then that puts a lot of pressure on the coach. What kind of a question should we ask, and how do we navigate the entire discussion in a way that leads to a satisfactory and good outcome for the client? And the pressure is entirely on the coach. So in this talk, Peter will talk about a very unique way of asking questions, where you will learn what makes a question really powerful and gives you, as a coach, your greatest potential to generate and bring about a lasting change and a big, massive change in your clients. Plus, this method is a lot of fun to use. So with this, I'm going to hand over to Peter. Peter, over to you. We look forward to hearing from you on this session. Welcoming Peter Freeth on this topic, why asking questions is a barrier to problem solving. Over to you, Peter.
Okay, hi everyone. So I don't normally do many webinars, so this is a little unusual for me. What I'm going to do is explain you some of the background and the theory behind what I'm going to talk to you about and share with you. And then I think we'll do a couple of demos, and I'll show you this approach in action. So some point later on in the webinar, one of you might have an interesting goal or a problem that we can explore for a few minutes, and we'll see what happens. So get ready for that when the opportunity comes up. So as Amit said, I've been coaching for a while, probably since about 2000 or 2001. I'm a master trainer of NLP. I've written a few books. There's a couple of books that I've written. So NLP in business and coaching excellence and a lot more. And I'll refer a little bit to some of the things that are in coaching excellence, which is this one. And I suppose to pick up on Amit's introduction, as a coach, you are taught to ask questions, and you're taught to ask all different kinds of questions. And if you're a member of the ICF, or if you've looked at any sort of ICF qualifications or coach training, one of the ICF's credentialing criteria that will get you certified as an ICF coach is that you ask powerful questions. And that puts a lot of pressure on you as the coach, actually. The problem is that every question you ask is that's relevant to the conversation is itself constrained by the context that the client gives you. So the client will talk about whatever they want to talk about in this coaching session, some goal that they have, for example, and that's what you ask questions about. And coaching I suppose coaching as a problem solving, or as a support tool, or as a way of helping people to achieve goals, it is at least better than just giving people advice and telling them what to do, because I'm sure you've been in the situation where maybe you're talking about a problem that you're having at work, and your friends or your family immediately get into, I'll tell you what you have to do, and what you should do is, and have you tried this, and have you tried this, and your approach is all wrong, you have to go and tell your boss exactly what you think of him, and your answer is probably, yeah, well, but you don't understand, and yeah, maybe I'll think about it. And what's happening is that the If you're telling somebody about a problem that you've got, something that you're worried about, or something that you don't know how to move forward with, the natural assumption is that you are telling them because you don't know what to do about it. And therefore the fact that that you're telling them about a problem means that implies to them that you're asking them for their advice or their guidance. And so they are quite happy to give you that, because we all love to be asked our advice, don't we? So if you put yourself now in the position of coach, when you are talking to a client, and that client is telling you about a problem that they've got, they're drawing you into that problem, into that story that they're telling you. And as a coach, you want to help. That's what the client is doing, and so you're trying to ask neutral questions, but your questions are never neutral. At the very least, your questions are constrained by what the client has already told you. So every question you ask is limited by the limits that the client places upon themselves. That's really unavoidable in that kind of coaching conversation. Even if you think you're asking a really clever question, like what could you do if you had no limits, that's still limited. If we look at the language, no limits is a negation, which is the same as accepting that there are limits. What would you do if there were no limits? Presupposes and assumes and imposes limits on what the client can do or achieve. So we know that questions are more effective than just telling people what to do, just giving advice. Even if you wrap up that advice as a question. So instead of just saying, oh, you should go and talk to your boss and sort it out, even if we wrap that up as a question and say, have you thought about talking to your boss? We're just using it to introduce an idea. We're using it to impose our agenda. So that's, we don't get anywhere with that, really. So we know that the solution to the client's problem is always for them to do something different. But it can be very difficult to know what that would be, what actually constitutes different to what they've done before. So if we know that the power of the coach is in getting the client to look outside of those current boundaries or the current frame of reference, why do coaches still ask questions that are constrained by that frame of reference? And I think partly it's because coaching is a conversation. And in any conversation, we want to make sense. We want to be relevant. We want to be understood. And as a coach, we want our questions to make sense. We want to appear to be smart or clever, insightful. We want the coach to, we want the client to think that we're a really good coach and we ask really good questions. And we want to show that we're listening, of course. So that's all good. But that's not what the client's paying you for. The client isn't paying you to be smart or clever or to listen. The client's paying you to help them get results. And if you really want to show that you're listening to your client, then actually the last thing you should do is ask questions. Because as soon as you ask a question, you change the subject. As soon as you ask a question, you've set the agenda. You've decided what the client is going to talk about. So if you're really listening, you just listen. But then you can probably expect the client's not going to get very far by just talking without any prompting or direction from you. If they only talk about what they want to talk about, they have a tendency to go around in circles. And I'm sure you've come across this in your coaching sessions. In fact, if you let the client just talk, exactly what they will do is go around in circles. They will tell you the same story over and over and over again, or they'll tell you different examples, different times when something happened, but they're all examples of the same underlying issue, the same underlying pattern of behavior, and that's what we've got to get to. The biggest problem, I guess, is that as soon as the client starts telling you about the situation they're in, or the problem, or even the goal, or what they want to achieve in the future, you will assume that what the client is telling you is true, and it isn't. you will assume if, for example, the client's talking about a problem, something that's stopping them from getting to where they want to be, you will assume that the client is describing the problem, and they're not. They're telling you a story. They're telling you what they want you to know. So when you start asking questions about what they've told you, the questions you ask will presuppose that there's a solution, will presuppose that maybe you have some idea about what that solution is, but they haven't even told you what the problem is. So straight away you launch into all your great questions and what could you do if you, if there were no limits and all that clever stuff. It doesn't get you anywhere. The client's not describing the problem to you. What they're doing is they are telling you a story about their symptoms. And that story isn't exactly true. It's coloured by their frame of mind. It's coloured by their perceptions. They're only telling you as much as they want to, so that they get you to do what they want you to do. Often that means they're not giving you enough information to give you something to engage with as a coach. Because if you did that, then you would take them through a process of change, and that could be very uncomfortable for them. They could be afraid of facing some barrier or some past experience that they've had that was uncomfortable or scary for them. So they don't want to do that. So they will tell you a story that actually encourages you to keep them exactly where they are. But at least they'll feel like they're making progress because they're talking to a coach and they're having these regular coaching sessions. The barrier that stops the client from moving forward or taking action is always fear. And if you are to help the client move forward and get to where they want to be, then at some point getting through that fear is inevitable. And it's inevitable that will be uncomfortable for them. So as a coach, you've got many options for how you achieve that. A lot of them tend to involve a lot of training, a lot of practice, a lot of hard work, and something that might seem a little counterintuitive: the ability to get out of rapport with the client. See, as coaches, and especially if you've done something, trained in something like NLP, you've got to get into rapport with them. You've got to join them in their reality. You have to join them in their world. You have to match them, and you have to get into their frame of mind and so on. How is that useful? They don't want to be where they are, so why would you join them there? And the more you join them in that rapport, the harder it is for you to ask challenging questions, or questions that shift their focus or move them outside of that boundary or that frame of reference, because everything that you ask that moves them closer to that barrier of fear will make them feel uncomfortable, and if you're in rapport, that will make you feel uncomfortable, and you will back off, you will avoid it. So if you've ever ended a coaching session and thought, I had a bunch of great questions I wanted to ask there, or a really challenging question, but it wasn't the right time, or it wasn't appropriate, or they were making good progress by themselves and I didn't need to ask, and I'll ask it next time. If you've ever done that in a coaching session, if you've ever thought of a question and chosen, no, it's not the right time to ask that, that's a good sign that you're in too much rapport with the client, and you are being pushed back by that fear barrier, just like they are. So you're actually joining them in their inaction. You're joining them in their repetitive cycle of behavior. So that's not helping them. So I'm going to show you a different way to do that, to achieve that, to get past the fear barrier, or just to step outside the boundaries of the problem and the context of the problem. So it's a fun way to do it. Or you can use it as a serious way, or in a fun way, or whatever you want to do, just to change the balance a little bit of the relationship with the client. That can be helpful as well. When you get past that fear barrier, what you're able to do is take the client into a much more productive space, and then they will know what to do. You don't need to set action plans. You don't need to get them to commit to actions. As soon as they're past that fear barrier, they're in that more productive space. They know what to do. They want to take action. Just let them go and do it. Couldn't be easier for you as a coach. So in this webinar, I'm going to share with you some some advanced concepts from psychology and neuroscience. It will help you to make your questions more effective. I'll show you a tool that will help you to do that. But actually, if you understand the concept of how the tool works, you don't need it. You can make up your own questions. If you understand the way that it does its job. But first, I just want to look again at this ICF requirement for asking powerful questions. As I said earlier, it puts a lot of pressure on you as the coach. You've got to come up with a good question. You've got to listen to what the client's saying. You've got to come up with a powerful question, a question that's really going to make an impact on them. And is the client passive in this? Will they just sit there and wait for you to come up with the next good question? The next question that's going to empower their choices and inspire them to take action or something like that. I think it's worth bearing in mind that as a coach, you cannot empower your clients. You're not a battery. You can't plug yourself in and charge them up. You don't have power to give them. You can't give them confidence. You don't have confidence to give to them. And a question can't be powerful. If the question could be powerful, just send it them in an email or just write it on a bit of paper and give it to them. You don't need to be there. If the question is doing the power, if the power is coming from the question, if the question is doing the work, then why waste time with a coaching session? Just send them the question. Something else must be happening for the client to have that insight and to change their behavior that then leads to them changing the results that they get. So something else must be going on. It can't be just the question that's having that impact. So let me just share something in my screen. So you should be seeing a little image, a little diagram. And what this is showing you, I hope you're seeing the diagram. If you can't see a little diagram with orange boxes, then just send me a message in the message box. So
we can see.
Great, thanks. So what you're seeing here is a representation of a pattern of behaviour in the client. So, for example, they go on a diet and they lose weight, and then they put all the weight back on again, and then they go on a diet and lose weight, and then they put all the weight back on again. Or, for example, they get a new job. And for a few weeks, it's all fantastic and exciting. And then they start to maybe resent feeling, like they have to do what their boss tells them, and they resent having to go to the same place every day, and start to resent their colleagues or their boss. And so they think, well, the solution is the people. It's the people, it's the environment, it's the culture, it doesn't suit me. So they look for another job, they get into another job, few weeks, everything's great, it's all new and exciting. And this pattern goes on and on and on and on and on. Or they cycle between being employed and self-employed, employed and self-employed. And what happens is when you sit down with the client and ask them to tell you about it, they will tell you about one example, one instance of that. And if you say to them, can you tell me about another time when that's happened? They will tell you about a different instance. But what's happening is, at the time that they're talking about the particular situation or the particular problem, that's their entire reality. They're constrained within this box. So if we're asking questions only about this instance, that's what they will tell you about. But this instance is irrelevant. It's an example of an underlying or a repeating pattern. Now we could ask them about, well, what happens in between times? Often they won't be aware, because they're aware of significant events, things that happen to them. They're not so aware of what they're doing that makes it happen. Maybe if they were, then it wouldn't be happening. They would already break that pattern of behavior by themselves. So we can ask questions about what happens in between times. That can be useful. There are some techniques that, for example, in NLP, there are some techniques called timeline, where we can sort of step back and we can look at the whole pattern or the whole long-term sequence of times when this behavior has taken place, or this experience has taken place. If you're familiar with an NLP technique called the six-step reframe, that's basically a way of doing this, of joining together all these separate instances and getting the client to think, there's a pattern here. If my boss has been overbearing and micromanaging and has constrained me in 6 previous jobs, maybe it's me. But people tend to not have that realization by themselves. And also, that's a very uncomfortable insight to get to take responsibility for the situation. So people will generally avoid getting to that sort of level of insight. One of the problems with looking at these patterns of behavior, if this is the present, if these 3 are the past, this darker orange one is the present, and these 2 lilac ones, these purple ones, they're in the future. So when the client says, oh, this always happens, whenever I get into a new relationship or I start a new job or whenever I lose weight or whatever it might be, it always happens. So the client's projecting that past experience forward into the future. We don't know that's definitely going to happen, but if they're that confident that it's going to happen in the future, it's probably them that's making it happen. We could ask questions that have nothing to do with what they're telling us about, that are completely irrelevant, that are in the space all around the issue. The problem is, and the fine balance that we have to find, is that if we ask questions that are completely irrelevant, all we do is change the subject. It doesn't actually change what's going on for the client. If we ask questions that are in the problem that they're describing to us, those questions will be constrained by it, won't make any difference. So what we have to do is ask questions that sort of find a balance between the two, find questions that are outside of the problem, but which the client will relate to the problem. And that's what we're going to explore with the tool that I'm going to show you. You've probably seen this before, just a little bit of information about how we take in information and use that to make decisions and take action. We receive information from the outside world through our many senses, and that information gets distorted and filtered, and we don't remember things exactly as they are. We don't see the world exactly as it is. It's coloured by our expectations, our mood, our past experiences. And what we do is we create an understanding, a comprehension. That allows us to make decisions, and those decisions mean that we take action. That action that we take changes the outside world. And when we change the outside world, the sensory information that we get tells us the effect of that action, feeds back in, forms a new comprehension, forms new action. So what we will tend to do over time, and this is a principle called confirmation bias, what we will do is we'll take an action intending that it will work, it will get us the result that we want. And because of this filtering, we will only notice if that action works and ignore it if it doesn't. So we will start to believe and start to form a loop whereby we think that we always know what's happening, we always know that what we're going to do works, or it might be the opposite. We might say it never works. That person never likes me. My boss never gives me any positive feedback. And what we do is we delete, we remove any instances of positive feedback, and we distort what's left, or the absence, into our boss is really mean to me and never supports me, and so on. And that forms our reality. Our reality colours the action that we take, and then our senses are selective and filtered in order to reinforce that belief. And this cycle, if we look at this cycle playing out over time, and we put this into a longer term context, what we see is that the action that I take becomes my sensory reception, new information, that forms or reinforces my model of reality, my map of the world, and so it goes on. However, when we take action, it's not just us that gets feedback, it's other people as well. If you decorate your house, it isn't just you that sees it, or your friends and family see it as well, and it influences them as well. So imagine that this is now the client. They've had some experience, they've formed some decision about their experience, they call it a problem or a goal or something they want to do differently. They take action, and you, the coach, is now getting some information. Now you're forming a perception based on your past experiences, and you're taking action. You're asking a question back to the client. The client takes that question. They filter it through their experiences. They answer the question. The whole thing is very complicated because we're not interacting directly in this outside world, this world of reception. We're interacting through this inner world. The client isn't telling us exactly what's going on. The client is telling us what they remember, the story that they have told themselves, the story that they're reinforcing to themselves over and over again. So we have some technical challenges to overcome. If as an outside observer, we are going to affect change in another person's mind, because we can't interact with their mind directly, and they're not showing us their mind directly. This timing issue, so by the time you see my face and hear my voice, I took action, I don't know, maybe half a second ago, because of the delay in you receiving this over the internet. But actually I took action. I spoke to you about half a second before I decided, about half a second after I decided what to say. So if you're basing your question or your intervention based on what I'm doing and what I'm saying, the decisions that I took and the perceptions that I formed happened long in the past. They happened long before what you see, long before the story that I tell you. So this timing issue is particularly tricky to overcome. I've got some videos on my YouTube channel. I'll share the URL with you later that will show you some, I'll be demonstrating some ways to overcome the issue of timing and how you can get one step ahead of the client so that you can start to influence that process directly. This sequence of repeating behaviors, it's not really a sequence, a linear sequence, of course, it's a cycle. Time will pass on the clock, but in that person's mind, and in terms of their decisions that lead to their behavior, they're right back where they started. They're starting a new job. They are listening to the feedback from their boss. They're getting frustrated. It's all happening again. Why does this always happen to me? So that cycle repeats, and from their point of view, they're right back where they started, even though 6 months might have passed by, and somebody might be Lena. You might want to mute your microphone. As the coach, one of the ways that you'll pick up on that cycle of behavior is that you'll have a few coaching sessions with the client. They might go on over some weeks or months, and at some point you will sit there and you'll think to yourself, hang on, I'm sure we've had this conversation before. I'm sure this has happened before. And you have to wait for that long time to pass before you realize we're going around in circles here. That might not make you feel particularly productive or valuable as a coach. So this cycling pattern of behavior, it's very common, although actually it's not the only pattern of behavior that will prevent you as the coach from helping that client to make changes. So what would be useful is a really simple tool that would actually help us in any of these scenarios. So we don't have to get into the complexities and all the technicalities of how we can overcome these sort of perceptions and change that process of perception and decision making that leads to the problems in the first place. The fundamental problem in coaching, whatever the client's pattern of behavior is, the fundamental problem for the coach is always the same. That asking questions about what the client is telling you reinforces what the client is telling you. When you ask a question that's relevant to the client's context, you implicitly agree that that context is true. You've entered that shared reality, you've gotten into rapport, and as soon as you do that, you've ceased to be effective. And remember that the client isn't telling you about their problem, they are telling you a story about the symptoms, and they are doing that to influence you to maintain the status quo, because in that there is familiarity, comfort, and safety. And if there's any risk to them, any risk of getting into a scary experience or reproducing some past scary experience, they will prefer to stay exactly where they are, even though intellectually they know that doesn't make sense. Intellectually they know they want to move on. So I'm going to show you the unsticker. It's a problem-solving tool that uses questions to unravel sticky problems. So when a client feels stuck, or when you're in a coaching session and you're thinking, I'm not getting anywhere here, I don't know what question to ask next, we just seem to be going around in circles, and you feel frustrated. I mean, that's a sign of rapport. If the client's stuck, you'll be stuck. I'll tell you a little bit about where the unsticker came from first. So probably about 15 years ago, I thought it would be a good idea to create an online coaching tool where somebody would go to my website. I had a number of different online tools at the time. And I thought it would be good to have an online tool where somebody could come and type in a problem, and the tool would pick out certain types of words, and then it would ask them intelligent questions. So if it picked out words like must and need and should, then it would ask a question like, who says you should, or who says you must, recognizing that those are examples of words that imply some external influence or external standard that a person is trying to live up to. So it seemed like a great idea, but the complexities and the problems of coding it were way beyond me. And what I accidentally invented was not a tool that asked questions that were relevant to the problem. I accidentally invented a tool that asked questions that were irrelevant to the problem. But because the client is sitting there thinking about the problem, they will make the questions relevant. And many people have said that after about 4 or 5 questions, they can't even remember what the problem was. And the unsticker will, at the very least, change the way that you think about a problem, and that makes it then easier to move the conversation forwards and to help the client find a solution. There's lots of different versions of the unsticker. There's a free Android app. There's a book that's got 303 questions in it. There's a version of it in this book, Coaching Excellence. There's a free online version that I'm going to show you. There's a pocket version, which is this little one here that I give away at conferences and so on. And as you can see, that's got about 25-ish, 30-ish questions in there. And the point is that you just pick them randomly. So in a moment, I'm going to ask for somebody who's got a problem to share that, and I'll ask some unsticker questions, and we'll see what happens. The rules to using the unsticker are select questions randomly. The temptation is to look at a question and say, oh, no, that doesn't make sense, or that doesn't fit, and keep looking until you find a good question. What that is a sign of is that you're finding a question that fits inside the problem, and therefore it isn't going to change it. So the randomness is critical. Ask every question that you select. So don't turn to a random question or pick a random number in the book and find a random question, then think, oh no, not that one. So ask the question, whatever it is, no matter how strange it seems. Take time to properly think about every question. The client doesn't have to give a verbal answer, but give them time to fully consider that question. And then just keep asking questions until the problem changes, and that's all there is to it. So I'm going to share my screen again, and you should now be able to see the unsticker. And this looks exactly like the Android. And so, I'll tell you what, before we get onto the unsticker, before we get onto that, I'm going to, here we are. I'm going to show you a contrast. I'm going to show you what happens if we stay within the context of the problem. So we've got 22 participants online. So who would like to ask, well, not a question, who would like to state a problem? Who would like to work on a problem, or a problem related to a goal that you have? Who'd like to do that? Anybody? Just put your hand up, or type in the message box, or unmute your microphone. Who's got a problem?
Yeah, hi everyone. If you have any specific, before that, Peter, the question I have is, do they need to share the whole content, or can they just say, for example, I procrastinate a lot in a certain task that I need to do every day?
Yeah.
Or do you need to know exactly what they're procrastinating about?
No, we don't need a lot of context. I mean, they'll give it anyway. We can't stop them. Once they start talking about it, they'll tell us all about it. But it can be very general. I've got a problem at work. I'm really worried about it. You can just say that. So you don't need to give us any detail of what the problem is. So who's got something that you want to share? Got one from James O'Brien. Thank you, James. And he sent a message saying, I'm starting up my own training/coaching company. I am struggling to describe my USP. Lovely. So if I'm asking questions that are related to the context, normal coaching questions, I might say, James, tell me more about, what you say you're starting up. What have you actually done? You say you're struggling. Can you describe that in more detail? Your USP, what can you tell me about your USP? What is it that you do? And all of this. I ask a load of questions about the content, but all I'm doing is finding out information. I'm not going anywhere with it. It's not helping anywhere. And that's very unlikely to help James to do what he says, which is to describe his USP. And there is something about describing his USP that he thinks is relevant to starting his training coaching company. And you'll notice, if you can all, I sent it to me privately. James, if it's okay with you, I'm just going to copy that back to everybody. I don't think I can copy it back to everybody. But to read it literally then, I am starting up my own training/coaching company, ... I am struggling to describe my USP. So what he's done is he's put 4 full stops in there, indicating a pause, or there's something missing. Something was in that gap that's gone missing that he didn't tell us about. And that might be something that we explore in the conversation. But all the time that I'm asking questions, what you will notice is that I have joined in with the assumption that he is starting his own company and he is struggling to describe his USP. So as soon as I ask any question about what James has said, I will accept that what he's told me is true. And that is what will prevent me from being effective in helping him to solve that problem. Another way to get around that, something I demonstrated at the NLP conference last month, or I think it was in May. There's a video of it on the whole presentation on the YouTube channel. Is that I ask somebody what it is that they want. So I'll show you an example of that. So James, I don't know if you can or if you're willing to unmute your microphone, but if not, then you can just type in the message box. So James, that you described the problem previously. If I assume that what you want is to have your own training and coaching company, can you say where you are in relation to that right now?
I have. Can you hear me, Peter?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I've quit my job. I've handed my notice in. I'm working the last month of my notice. I've set the company up. I've thought about what my offer is going to be. Yeah, that's where I am. That's where I've got to.
Great. And what I demonstrated at the NLP conference was then to respond to that by saying, I don't think that what you just told me is true. And what that does is it creates quite a bit of discomfort. It's like, well, it's outrageous. Of course, what I've told you is true. That's exactly where I am. But it's not exactly where he is. And so there will be bits missed out, bits that will be changed a little bit or softened a little bit, because he's on a webinar. He's talking to a complete stranger in front of a bunch of other complete strangers, and he's cautious about how much he wants to give away and how much he wants to share. I think, just as an aside, James, the fact that you've handed in your notice, very brave, well done. So let's instead go to the unsticker. So let me share the screen again. And James, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a series of random questions. You can either answer the question, or you can just say, okay, when you've answered the question in your own head. So you can either answer it out loud, or you don't have to. It's entirely up to you. Is that okay with you?
That's fine.
Okay, so James, if we take I'm struggling to describe my USP as the problem statement that you gave earlier, what is this problem a sign of?
Okay.
Okay. Now that's interesting because we got a state change in the very first question there. It's not uncommon, but you know, the questions are random, so we can't predict what's going to happen. But if you listened carefully to what James said there, he said, huh. Okay. So when we got that, that's a state change. He'd had something had changed in the way that he was looking at the problem. So we'll keep going. So I'm not quite sure I understand you, James. Can you think that in a different way? And we got a so he's done it. But if you found this problem injured, would you take it to the vet?
Yes.
Oh, we've had that one. If you could paint this problem, what colour would you use third?
Yellow.
When was the last time you forgot this problem's name?
I don't think I've ever forgotten the problem's name.
Imagine a close colleague has this problem. What's your advice to them?
Okay.
How will having had this problem help you grow?
Yeah, it's okay, na?
Okay.
Next time was, of course, today was really unplanned.
Oh,
Thank you so
who's
much.
got their microphone on? Who could that be? It's gone again. Okay. What should you do?
Yep.
I want to make sure I understand. Can you think that from someone else's point of view?
Yep.
What won't you do?
Yep.
What would you do?
Yep.
Oh, we've had that one as well. So I'll ask it again. How will having had this problem help you grow?
Yep.
What would happen if this just slipped your mind? Imagine it's 10 years from now. How has the problem changed?
Yep.
How will having had this problem have helped you?
Okay.
What would happen if this just slipped your mind again?
Yeah.
And what is this problem a sign of?
Yeah.
The random number generator has not been very good to us today, is it? What does this problem sound like?
Yep.
Who can you depend on?
Yep.
And I'm going to switch to the pocket unsticker and just pick some random questions from this. What does the problem taste like?
Okay.
When is the problem's sell-by date?
Yep.
Is the problem half full or half empty?
Yeah. Okay.
Is the problem like a tub or a lid?
I like that one. Yep.
And what do you want most of all?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the questions there and just ask James, compared to when you first typed that problem statement a few minutes ago, what seems different now?
I guess no clearer on the solution or what the USP is, but certainly a couple of extra ideas on what I'm going to do to get clearer on it.
And in terms of the coaching session, that's all we need to get to. All we need to get to in the coaching session is the point where the client feels like they've got something they can go away and do, a step they can take. So if James is clearer on a couple of things that he could do, he's got a couple of new ideas, he'll go and act on those. And the next time we talk in a coaching session, he'll tell me what happened with those ideas, and we move forward from there. And the next time we get to the point where we feel like we get to a bit of resistance, or we don't make progress, then we will get the unsticker out again, and it's as simple as that. Now, if I get it more into the technical complexity of the language, if you listened to James's responses, even though he wasn't answering most of those questions out loud, he was just giving us a yes. What you probably noticed is there was a difference in the length of time that he paused before he answered, and there was a difference in his voice tone when he said yes, and sometimes he laughed. So those are giving us clues that his perception must be changing, because his behavior is changing, because his language is changing. And so we know, or we can infer, that something is changing in the inside. We don't know what that is, but it's opening up new possibilities, new ideas that he can progress in, in the real world. Because, as all of you know, the power in coaching isn't in what you do in the coaching session, it's in what the client does in between coaching sessions. That's where they actually affect change in the real world, that they can then report back on, and then you kind of move forward from there. To get into the sort of technical analysis of the language and so on, which is the more technical approach, based on something called meta model, struggling to describe probably isn't true. That's the bit that isn't true. He isn't struggling to describe it, because he probably isn't describing it to anyone. So if we take describe as what's called a performative verb, in that it's an action that he is taking now, he writes, I am struggling to describe my USP, but that's not true. What is true is I'm typing the words, I'm struggling to describe my USP. It's a bit tricky to get your head around, I know. But the point is this: when he describes the struggle, it isn't in the act of describing, it's in the act of thinking about, planning for, predicting how he's going to describe. And what makes it a struggle is that he second guesses what the other person will think when he describes it. So if he thinks it doesn't sound really snappy and punchy and clear and fantastic, and it's a 3-minute elevator pitch and it's really compelling and interesting, then the other person is going to say, yeah. Or worse still, they're going to say, yeah, you're a rubbish coach, you're an idiot, and I don't want to talk to you ever again. And therefore the fear that's stopping James from taking action and getting to where he wants to be, which is just getting out and having conversations with people, is fundamentally the fear of rejection. And for human beings as a social species, that's an overwhelming fear, because for any social species, rejection is life-threatening. If we're not part of the crowd, if we're not part of the tribe or the social group, then we're out on our own, and our safety is threatened. So you can either answer yes or no, or not at all, James. If you prefer not to answer at all, that's absolutely fine. But was I anywhere close to what you're experiencing in saying that the struggle is imagining how you're going to describe a USP to somebody in a way that's going to be compelling and interesting, and that they're going to be interested and engaged with, rather than you have found it, you are finding it difficult just to get the words out? Is it in the planning and the preparation for that?
Yes and no. You are right. That's one half of it. The other half of it is here we are struggling. I'm struggling to articulate what separates me from the hundreds of other people in my field that do what I do. Yeah. So from that side, I still don't feel like I have a USP, and I need to find that. But there is, exactly as you've said, because conceitedly, I'd like to say that it's me. I'm my USP. I'm the differentiator. But saying that to someone isn't. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
We got there in the end. You're half right. Oh no, you're right. Yeah. So what you'll have noticed there is that by moving James past that point of fear, by acknowledging the rejection, he just spontaneously unloaded. He just told us a whole load of information that I didn't ask for, because he'd moved past that point and he was free, and he used the absolutely critical word in that, which is conceited. Telling someone, what makes me special as a coach is me. And you either like me or you don't. If you think I'm the coach for you, let's get started. If not, good luck. Admitting that the client will buy from you because they like you is not a conceit. So imagining it as conceited, that's what creates the struggle. And if somebody thinks you are conceited as a coach, they're not going to work with you anyway. So, the sooner you can get that on the table, the sooner you've ended that conversation and you can get on to the next one. So it's a win-win, really. And some of the coaches and the NLP trainers I bump into at the NLP conference, they're amongst the most conceited people I've ever met. Doesn't seem to do them any harm. So there we go. So I just wanted to, and thank you, James. Thank you very much for taking part in that. So I just wanted to show a little bit more depth to what was going on behind the questions and behind that change in state, and that then creates the change in perception that we get with the unsticker. I guess at the moment, if you think about the pattern of the questions with the unsticker, for example, what does the problem taste like? What it's forcing the listener to do is to focus in on one narrow aspect of the problem, and maybe an aspect of the problem that they hadn't previously thought about. If we take a question like, is the problem here or there? What it forces the listener to do is separate the problem or dissociate from the problem and place it in these two imaginary positions, here and there. So it forces a dissociation. And again, if any of you have studied NLP, you'll know that dissociation tends to reduce the emotional impact of an experience. And if we reduce the emotional impact, they're more likely to see it objectively or to find a different way of tackling it. I mean, that's all the fast phobia cure is about. So actually, is the problem here or there? It's a fast phobia cure in one question. What is the problem's sell-by date? We take the metaphor of a sell-by date that we apply to something like food that we buy in the supermarket. So we understand what the metaphor means. But if we apply it to a problem, what that presupposes is the problem will run out and you'll have to throw it away. If you don't eat this problem by Tuesday, you've got to throw it away. That would be wasteful. We don't want to waste the problem. Let's eat it. So what it does is it brings in all of those metaphors. But fundamentally, in order for those metaphors to be processed, the assumption that the problem will expire and soon is assumed, is presupposed. How slow is this problem? Presupposes the problem has a speed, and therefore that it's moving, and if it's moving it can change. So once you start to look through the unsticker, what you'll see is that the questions have patterns, they have underlying structure. They're not just silly questions for the sake of it, but actually each question forces a reframe or a change in position, or a change in the observer's position relative to the problem, changes the size of the problem, or it changes the distance of it. In NLP, what we call reframes, or change of perceptual positions. They can shift the problem around in time. So some questions, for example, one of the questions I asked James was, how will having had this problem have helped you? Well, in order to do that, you've got to put yourself in a point in time when you can remember having had the problem in the past, which in order to do that, you have to take up a position where you don't have the problem currently. So it becomes suddenly possible to change. We don't know when, because we're not putting a time limit on that. So basically, the questions have a structure, and that structure creates change in perception and change in action. But if we rely on knowing meta model and Milton model and asking those sorts of questions, we will always relate those questions to context, and that will make them ineffective. When we're presented with those questions in a random order and we ask the question whether it makes sense or not, something very interesting happens. And we kind of heard a little sort of idea of this in James's nonverbal responses. And if you were following along with the questions, you might have noticed this too. In order for the question to affect change, the client does not have to answer the question. They only have to hear it. Because when you hear a question, what you will do in your brain is you will process the language, you will figure out what the words mean, and then you will create some sort of representation of that question relative to the problem. When the question makes sense, like, or tell me about your training and coaching company, tell me about describing your USP, tell me where you are in that. We're constrained within that problem. We're within the boundaries of it, and it isn't going to change. The client doesn't have to do anything in order to answer that question. All they have to do is look into the problem that's already in front of them and say, oh, there's the answer to that question, or there's the answer to that question. If we ask a slightly odd one, like, what part of the problem is blue? Oh yeah, that part. They've got to think a bit more about it. They've got to increase their level of awareness. But when we ask a question that's irrelevant, so for example, is the problem left or right? It doesn't immediately make any sense. So what does the client have to do in order not to answer the question? What does the client have to do in order to hear the question and make sense of the question? They have to change the problem to fit the question. And when they change the problem to fit the question changes shape a little bit, or changes size a little bit, and then after a few questions, it's become sufficiently distorted from its original stuck state. The client will now see an opportunity to do something different, or that problem's gone away altogether, because it was actually a problem of perception in the first place. So, for example, the problem of, I'm going to say something to somebody that's about myself that's good, that I'm proud about, that I feel good about. I've invested in myself in terms of training. I've taken this big risk in my life, and I'm ready to get out there and help people. And then suddenly we wrap that up in the idea that, oh, that's conceited to say that. That's clearly a matter of perception. But to the client, that feels as real as the feeling of their feet within their shoes. It feels as real as the conversation they're having with a potential client, even though it's based on past experience. So it may have been real once. Somebody may have said that to them once, but it's no longer true. It's no longer applicable to this situation. So usually a problem is a matter of perception, because if you think about what a problem is, unless your problem is physically in front of you right now, so unless your problem is your computer screen or your phone or whatever you're watching this webinar on, unless that's the problem is not in the here and now. So if your problem is some situation at work, then that problem is, as you represent it in your mind, is abstract. It's an abstract collection of symbols, of snippets of conversations and bits and pieces, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And you put those pieces of a puzzle together in such a way, like when they're making a film, a movie, and they take snippets of the film and they edit it together to make a trailer. And the trailer can often have very little relation to the story of the film, but its purpose is to make you interested, to make you think, oh, that looks good, I want to go and see that. So we do the same thing. We take these pieces of experience and we edit them together in such a way that it becomes a barrier, and then we call it a problem. But it isn't real. It's a perceptual process, not a sensory process, not a direct sensory process in the here and now. And so we know that what the client is telling us about the problem is always a representation. And therefore we know that it's always deleted, distorted, and generalized. And therefore we know that it's not true. However, the demonstration that I gave in the video of the NLP conference, where I say, I don't think what you just told me is true, that for many coaches and maybe less experienced coaches, that's too outrageous. That's uncomfortable. That's shocking. And it is uncomfortable to say it, but often in a coaching session, if you want to help the client to move, you've got to do something that makes them a bit uncomfortable. And you've got to be okay with that, because rather, better than be a bit uncomfortable, in James's situation, better to be a bit uncomfortable now in the conversation than to be very uncomfortable when he's out there at a networking event talking to a potential client. Let's have the discomfort now, get that out of the way while we're in this sort of private, shared with the whole internet, this private conversation. And let's work through that discomfort together now. But the first thing we've got to do is we've got to acknowledge it and put it on the table. For that, that's quite an involved process for an experienced client. What the unsticker does is it gives you a very simple way to access the same tools and the same underlying techniques, and it randomizes. By randomizing the questions, it means that the pressure is completely taken off you to think of the next question, and you know that you are free from the constraints of the problem. You know that you're free from the constraints of the story that the client's telling you, and the boundaries that imposes. And as long as you are talking about the problem when you're asking the questions, the client will relate it to that context. So remember that the most important thing that the tool does is, in order for the client to hear the question, they have to change the problem to fit the question. And that then introduces the possibility of real change in the real world as a result of them taking action, doing something different, implementing their ideas, taking a risk, trying out a conversation with somebody and see how it goes, that sort of thing. So that's really how it works, and the principles behind it. And as I say, if you look through the unsticker questions, you will recognize patterns in them. But if you think, oh, that's a great pattern, I'm going to use that, it's not going to work because you're missing the randomness. So as I say, it's free. It's the free online version, free Android version if you're lucky enough to have Android. If you've only got, if you're unfortunate enough to have an Apple device, then there's an online version that just shows you the question window and the button, so it's very clean and simple to use. No advertising or anything like that. It's just a tool that I want to share with as many coaches as possible, and just to help as many people as I possibly can. So I understand from Amit that we've now got some time for questions, as if we haven't had enough questions already. We've now got some time for questions from you. So Amit, I don't know if you're going to take over and facilitate this bit, but does anybody have any questions that you want to ask me?
Yes, thanks a lot, Peter. This was really very useful and very interesting. And just as I had mentioned to you earlier when we spoke, that in my master practitioner manual, I have explicitly mentioned about unsticker and your name as a very important source of information for coaching and counseling related questions. Some of these questions from the unsticker have been kind of tried as an exercise in the master practitioner, and everyone found very good results. So I think it is very effective and very useful. I will also now use this opportunity to throw open this forum for questions from anyone who wishes to ask. Please unmute your mic and you can ask your question to Peter.
Hello. Hi.
Hello, Ankita.
Hi. My name is Ankita, and I have a question. So my question is that will it have an impact on thinking of a client if the random questions that you ask them will be negatively framed? Like, say, if they include a no or any kind of a not or something like that, will it have an impact on the thinking of a client?
It will have an impact. We can't predict what that impact will be.
Okay.
But if we ask a question because we already think we know what the answer will be, we're already being ineffective.
Okay, so the questions necessarily have to be positively framed, right?
Either. I don't think it makes a difference.
Okay.
So the last one I think I asked James was, who can you depend on? We could ask, who can't you depend on?
Okay.
Who can you not depend on? Don't think of people you can depend on. I don't think it makes a difference either way.
Okay.
Good question.
Okay, thank you.
Who else we got? Or are you all out of questions now?
If anyone else wants to ask any question, please do so now.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you so much. And it was a great, amazing listening to you, and helped me a lot. And thanks to Amit also for organizing this. I have a very simple question. A lot of times, because I've also actually done my coaching workshop very recently from ICF, and so that's why I was even more interested in attending this, because there they did focus on a lot on asking questions. And this is quite an eye opener also, because I have gone through the struggle myself of trying to figure out what questions to ask, and what is the right kind of questions, also grappling with the inexperience of at the same time listening to the client, as well as trying to frame a question. So it also defeats the purpose, because you're not really being there, because sometimes you're so nervous, you're looking for the other question. But my question to you is that sometimes when clients are coming to you to be coached or to be helped, they're coming with a certain question. And though I personally find this line of questioning also, it makes a lot of sense to me. But has it ever happened in your experience that the client basically gets a little defensive, or they can't understand why are such unrelated questions being asked of him? And have you faced any challenges? And if you have, how do you deal with it?
That's a great question. That's a very common question for people to ask. And I think if a client comes in and sits down and you say, so what do you want to work on today? And they say, I'm thinking of starting my own business. And you say, and what color is that? They'll say, what are you talking about? It's a ridiculous, So we don't just necessarily launch into it. There's a time and a place. And I think what you described about, what you've learned about asking questions in coaching training, that's valuable too. I mean, when the client's moving, those questions that are helping them to explore and helping them to consider options and so on, they are all valuable. But they cease being valuable when you hit that barrier. And when you hit the barrier, you've got to asking more questions just creates more pressure on both of you. And so that's when the unsticker becomes useful, or this different approach or way of thinking becomes useful. And I know that the way that some people like to use it is by saying, for example, I saw this webinar on Saturday, and this guy had this really strange question thing, and it was kind of fun, it was a bit weird, but I've been looking for a chance to try it out. And I mean, I don't seem to be making much progress with the current questions. So, I mean, how do you feel about me asking? I mean, they're strange questions. They're a bit weird. But what do you think? Should we give it a try for a few minutes? And, are they going to say, no, I want to talk about what I want to talk about? And, so you can frame it in that way. You can frame it as, look, I got this tool. It's a bit of fun. It can just help you to think of things from a different point of view. Would you be willing to give it a try? So we can create a frame that makes it possible to ask any question. I had some coaching sessions last week with a group of senior managers in a company, and I think at some point in every conversation I said to them, as part of the coaching process, sometimes I will ask a question or make a suggestion that's going to seem quite challenging, and I just want you to know that I'm on your side. And if it feels challenging, then that's a sign that that's where we need to push in order to make progress. Is that okay with you? Every one of them, which was 11, said, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's great. And I asked them a question, and I still got the signs of discomfort, but they went with it and they answered it as best they could. So I think a lot of the time, how we frame it makes a difference. And you did this yourself when you started asking your question. You said, I've got a very simple question. Then you talked for about 10 minutes, and then you asked the question. So it was interesting how I was at one point thinking, is this a simple question? So I've just got a simple question, or I've got a really interesting question for you, or I've got a question that might seem a little strange, but I wondered if you'd be willing to play with it and just see what happens. So how we frame stuff will make a big difference as well. You're right.
Yeah, fantastic. That helps, and it makes sense. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Who's next?
Yeah, hi. Anyone else wants to ask any questions to Peter? Okay, so Peter, I had a couple of questions. The first one is obviously if we need to know a lot more or learn about this, which of your books would you recommend we should go for?
Well, the unsticker book is just questions, 303 questions. So if you just want a very simple tool that you can flick through, then the unsticker book. But as I say, there's the free online version that you can use. This book, Coaching Excellence, it has a version of the unsticker in it so that you can just pick it up and use it. But it's also got a lot about understanding the client's language, about understanding the patterns of behavior, and about fear and how we get people through that resistance and that barrier of fear. So there's that one. I'm just going to share a couple of URLs. So anynlp.com is my NLP website, and there's a lot of resources on there. So there's a lot of links to other sites, there's videos, there's resources, not just about NLP, but coaching as well. So you might find that useful. My corporate website, which is Genius Learning, again, there's a lot of resources, links, and then my YouTube channel. I try and record every time I speak at a conference or do any kind of presentation. And there's a couple of short training videos. There's actually there's the whole presentation from the NLP conference, which is also on the subject of the unsticker. That's on there. And I also made a short video, like a slideshow video, that just explains a little bit more about how it works. And this idea of asking questions which are not directly related to the context that the client's giving you, and why that works the way that it does. So, so you might find some useful stuff on there as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Peter. Does anyone have any questions for Peter? Want to know anything more? All right, so I'll probably ask my next one.
Okay.
So basically, can someone ask these questions to themselves?
That's a great question. That is actually why I created the online version. Yes, definitely. And I do. If I'm stuck, I just think, I don't know, what color is this problem? It's kind of brown. What sizes does the problem come in? Yeah, definitely. Because I think if you're trying to coach yourself, and so you're thinking, I've got this problem or this goal that I want to work on or something that I want to change, and then you're thinking about the questions to ask yourself, you are even more constrained than the coach, because you're not even telling the external coach the story. You're in it. And so that's totally constrained. And so if you use an external tool, any external coaching framework or problem-solving framework is designed to work in this way, by forcing you to ask the questions that otherwise you wouldn't ask. So, for example, in sales, we might have a qualification framework in sales that asks the salesperson to find out, are they talking to the decision maker? Does the customer have budget allocated? Because we know that they're important questions to ask. And we know that if we leave salespeople to their own devices, they won't ask them because they're uncomfortable questions to ask. So by having a framework, it forces us to know that there was information missing. It's like the picture on a box of a jigsaw puzzle. You've got all these puzzle pieces. How can you put them together if you don't know what they're supposed to be? So you look at the picture of the box and you can see that it's countryside, or it's the beach, or it's some aeroplanes or something like that. And now you've got some clues about what's missing. So with the online version or any version of the unsticker, yeah, definitely. And it's even more important there, the randomness and just the practice of making sure you ask and consider every question. So definitely you can use that with yourself.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Peter. So yeah, one more chance. If anyone would like to ask any questions, any more queries that you might want to ask. All right, so I think we've not got more questions here, Peter, but thank you very much for spending time and sharing this extremely powerful way of asking questions, but not really asking questions, which is so very interesting and so effective. And for the audience over here, I can mention that yes, the unsticker is extremely powerful and it works. It gives phenomenally good results. So I would definitely recommend it. And on behalf of all of us here, Peter, and some of us who had to leave early, on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for spending time taking us through this entire way of asking questions and helping clients to find solutions. So really, thank you very much. And with this, I would like to close today's session on behalf of all of us. Thank you once again, Peter.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for listening in, and thank you those of you who joined in and asked questions. And I shared the URLs. There are some contact forms on those websites. I've shared the URL for the unsticker on the group chat, theunsticker.com. So if any of you got questions after this webinar, or you want to get in touch anytime, then I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Peter, thank you, Amit.
Thank you.
Thank you.